Thanks for coming out. This is going to be a great panel discussion about independent bookstores, which I know you all support. And we're not going to wait to the end for questions. We got a few hear from our panelists and maybe a question or two, and then start thinking about your questions. We'd like to get everybody involved sooner rather than later. We have a great panel. I think you probably know most of the folks here. Down on the end, we have Don Braasch, owner of a Bunch of Grapes, and then next to Don is the fabulous author of Ward Just. And then we have Steve Fischer, who is the executive director of the New England Independent Booksellers Association, and next to me, another fabulous author, Richard Russo. So without further ado, they're going to talk a little bit about themselves and thoughts on independent bookstores, and we'll start with Don.
Can't you start with Richard?
Reverse alphabetical.
Yes, I'm Dawn. I own Bunch of Grapes Bookstore. I still believe in the printed word.
Mike's not working. It's on.
Yeah, it's on. Is that better? No.
Do you want this one? Do you, is the little green light on?
There you go. Is that better? I've owned the bookstore for 5 years now, during which time we've seen a huge shift. Our sales have dropped almost in half, which is a killer. You can blame it on a lot of things, and I think that's maybe what we're going to discuss a little bit today. I'm sorry. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. I've been told I mumble. So anyway, owned the bookstore for 5 years, and we just moved a year ago across the street in order to bring down my overhead and keep the bookstore alive. We have a hugely supportive year-round population who really has stuck by us. And we're thankful for summer people who come and buy books, but it is a struggle. And I'm hoping we'll talk about why today.
Board.
I have a bit of a news bulletin for those of you who have not stayed in touch. It's impossible for me to stay in touch because I own no electronic equipment of any kind, including a computer. So I got this information from a friend of mine. The Boston Globe was sold today by the New York Times for $500 million. I mean, 75,000? 70 million. 70 million. My facts are often elastic. This is the newspaper that the New York Times bought maybe 20 years ago, something like that, for $1.2 billion. This is sort of only tangential to what we're supposed to be talking about today, but it shows the decline of quality in America. The Boston Globe is a very fine regional newspaper. You can look on that. You can look on this as significant in that the paper returns to Boston ownership. I understand the buyer was one of the owners of the Boston Red Sox, and it's always better for a paper to be locally owned. But let's figure again, 70 million or whatever it was, and $1.2 billion. It's just an indication of where we are. I had a wonderful discussion with a friend of mine 15, 20 years ago. The great philosopher Ronald Dworkin, alas, passed away earlier this year. The argument became so heated that it almost erupted in fisticuffs. That would have been a sight, I can tell you. Dworkin and I can barely lift a glass, let alone a fist. His proposition was as follows, and this is, as I say, a conversation 20 years ago. He said, the time will come when books are going to be simply impulses on a pad. And you're never going to have to buy a book again as long as you live because you've got this pad and you can tune into all these things are going to be out there. I became enraged because I said, okay, how does the author benefit here? What's his vigorish, as the gamblers like to say, out of all this? And he said, that'll work itself out. I said, it won't work itself out. And you're going to end up with a literary community divided along one of two lines, sometimes both, either independent wealth or a tenured professorship at some fancy university, which will allow you to write on the side. That isn't the way you're supposed to write on the side, I don't think. I mean, a lot of people do it, and they do it to, they do it to great effect, and I could think of a couple if it just occurred to me for a second. Saul Bellow, for one. Jeffrey Wolfe, yeah. But the soul of writing for most people is private writing, meaning that's what you do with your days. You sit down and go tap, tap, tap on the typewriter. And I fear that is beginning to slip away from us too. And I wish I could be optimistic. I think in a strange way, the future of just say American literature for the moment really lies in the hands of the independent bookstore. Good luck, Dawn. So I'm sort of depressed about the situation so far as the book business is concerned. Thank you.
All right. Steve?
My name is Steve Fischer, and I'm the executive director of the New England Independent Booksellers Association. And I guess I'm the one up here who has to fight the good fight and put in a few words about the present, which is tough. It's a tough economy. Long before there were e-books, there was online shopping, and Amazon got into that game and really put another fork in an already pretty small pie of book selling. And yet, here we are, we've got 2 days devoted to a book festival. Now, nobody says that it's an e-book festival or a print book festival, but here we are. There's tremendous energy around authors and stories. The numbers of independent booksellers is not growing, but the past 3 years we've been flat in terms of the numbers in the U.S. anyway. Just to give you some numbers, in 1995, there were 5,000 independent bookstores in this country. Now, I was in publishing then, and I can tell you that the 5,000 independent bookstores weren't necessarily good stores, but they were there, and they were all over America. In 2013, there are 2,000. So on the one hand, I think it's interesting that it's more than half have gone out of business. But the fact that there are 2,000 independent stores is surprising to a lot of people, and a lot of them, if they've lasted this long, are doing pretty well. And they serve, this is Dawn's career. She's done a fantastic job as a bookseller. And the two authors up here with me, who I think have benefited enormously from the independent book channel. And I'd hate to see any of that go away, but I'm not stupid. And I think it's a real challenge as we go forward in the next 5-10 years, where all of you are going to make decisions about where you buy your books.
Thank you. Rick?
Well, I'll just begin by saying if any of you know my name and have read my books, it's because of independent booksellers. When I started my career, my publisher sent me around on absolutely ridiculous book tours, where they were spending a lot of money on planes and hotels and all of that, and there weren't many radio shows that wanted to talk to me, certainly in Chicago or Denver, any place else they were selling me. But they would send me to independent bookstores, which would set up, chairs for me. Usually, optimistically, 7 or 8, and then when those 7 or 8 chairs didn't fill up, the employees themselves sat in them, and I would tell them who I was, and they had my first novel in their hands, and then they went out and sold that book by hand. Young writers coming along today with so few comparatively, Dawn's business is down by a half, and there are fewer than half as many independent bookstores. Then you have the people that I worry about, of course. Ward and I will be okay, but the young people in the pipeline, there's some tremendous, wonderful talent in the pipeline, and without independent bookstores to hand sell their books, I think I'm depressed too, and we have good reason to be as a result of the way things are shaking up. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about Amazon at some point in all of this. But I just have, in addition to, from the author's side, as some of you know, my family and I have been visiting Martha's Vineyard for many, many, many years. And when my wife Barbara and I would come, when our daughters, who are now in their 30s, but we would come to the island, and both Emily and Kate used to wait for a rainy day, because then we used to get to go to the Bunch of Grapes. And they had a certain amount of money that they could spend in there. They would spend the better part of an afternoon on the floor in front of the kids' books, deciding which books that they were going to buy, while Barbara and I were upstairs finding treats of our own. And so, I've tried over the years to pay back as in small ways to independent booksellers that have been so good to me. One of the ways is that I actually bred an independent bookseller. My daughter Emily is an independent bookseller in Brooklyn. I am very vested in their continued survival, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about some of the challenges that they face.
I want to start with, let's go to Amazon, Rick. When that app came out where they were having folks come into the stores and check the prices, you wrote this op-ed piece for the New York Times. When your daughter said, she sent you an email, the bookseller, and the byline was, "Can you hear me screaming in Brooklyn?" Yeah. So talk about what prompted you to write that op-ed piece, and the other authors you contacted, and your collective response to this.
Well, it was that exasperated email that I got from my daughter about that, and just to refresh your memory, for some of you, if you don't remember what the gadget was, they had a little gadget that they encouraged people to go in, and you could scan. The particularly cruel part of it was that they encouraged people to go into their local bookstore and scan what a particular book was selling for, and then Amazon, of course, would inform them how much cheaper it was to buy through Amazon. The particularly cruel thing about it was, I thought that it was that people in the bookstore would look around, and say, "Boy, we've got a lot of traffic today. The store is full." But of course, at the end of the day, the register wasn't ringing up much. Emily also was working at a bookshop at the time, or had been working at a bookshop and been tracking this for a long time, of people coming into the campus bookstore where she was working with a set of, just tracking down their kids' textbooks, et cetera, writing down ISBN numbers. And she and others would go over and try to be helpful to them. And at the end of the day, they'd have $500 worth of textbooks to buy, and they would leave the store armed with this information. And Emily and they would just respond, saying, "Oh, no, we're not going to buy here. We're just going to go home and buy it on Amazon where it's cheaper." And it was interesting because they didn't seem to have any sense of guilt over this. It was almost as if no matter where you buy the book, the bookstore will get a cut. That was the bizarre thinking. And you actually had to tell people. Ann Patchett still does this in her own bookstore in Nashville. She tells people that that's not the case. to treat a bookstore as a showroom, and people will often come up to her and say, what a wonderful bookstore you have, even as they're walking out the door with a list of titles that they're going to buy on Amazon. And if you treat showrooms this way, bookstore showrooms, and if you go into the Bunch of Grapes and say, God, what a great bookstore, and then you buy somewhere else, it's going to go away.
And that happens so much. What we found is that we're not, there aren't less customers coming through the door. They're buying less. And just 2 days ago, as I was getting ready for the book festival, I was pulling books off the shelf, and two customers who happened to be standing next to me, she turned to him and she said, you understand we can get these books a lot cheaper if we go home and order from Amazon. And I turned to her, you do want to scream.
Yeah.
Even when you're standing next to them. And I said, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear you say that. But it is difficult because you don't want to lose a potential customer. I think our challenge in the book world is really to educate people that I don't expect Amazon to go away anytime soon. But if all you're doing is using me as a showroom and you're not spending any of your money in our bookstore, then we will go away. And instead of having a book buyer who's been with the store for over 24 years, who understands what you want to read, not necessarily what's on the New York Times bestseller list, but what people who are vacationing and living on the vineyard want to read, and buys accordingly, you're going to have someone in Washington State deciding what you read. And that's part of the danger to me, and I think we need to do a better job of educating the public. I can talk at great length about when you spend your money locally, more of it stays in our community. We are huge contributors to charitable things on this island. Me personally, as well as the bookstore. We hire local people. We on and on and on. But somehow people aren't making that connection. And what do you do, and how do you respond when you hear the customer say, I can get it somewhere else much cheaper? And what do you say when they're sitting making long lists? You can't get angry. It's not good customer service, but it's this huge dilemma.
Steve, so I wanted you, Steve, because this is a frustration a lot of independent bookstore owners have. And then, of course, this week we had President Obama at the Amazon warehouse, which
Yes, we
frustrated a lot of you and a lot of other folks as well. So maybe you want to chime in here.
Well, just to, for those of you who don't have a television or a computer, Obama went to an Amazon white warehouse earlier this week to deliver one of his 5 economic addresses, and held up Amazon as an example of the kind of job creator that this country needs, and how it provides a model for middle-class employment. And, the truth is that Amazon hires an enormous number of part-time people. They're paid minimum wage. There have been instances, particularly in Europe and in some warehouses of Amazon's here in the U.S., of just unbearable conditions, no air conditioning, they're not given breaks. And furthermore, if you hire part-time people, you don't have to provide them with any kind of benefits, including health care. And so, in effect, what's happened is that you've got a Walmart or an Amazon, these large big box employers who, it looks good, they hired 5,000 people, but on the backs of actual taxpayers. So you get tax breaks if you open up a distribution center in Texas. And we'll give you a ramp off the highway so all your employees can get there. And there's actually a negative impact, and there's some figures that come out that are pretty astonishing that just show that actually it's a negative effect to have an Amazon warehouse come in and open business. I mean, anybody in this room can remember a time when the big thing was malls. You'd open up a mall. Every town wanted a mall. Little downtown didn't quite have enough. Couldn't wait. Some developer would come in and they put in a Walmart, or they put in some sort of store and this was happening in the 60s and 70s. And the next thing you know, that store doesn't really care about people. Maybe it goes out of business because the whole chain went out of business. So you've got a paved parking lot with a closed 25,000 square foot store, and your downtown is now a mere shell of what it used to be. So I think it's, we were really disappointed in Obama. Here's a guy who comes into a bunch of grapes with his girls, buys books. He supports Small Business Saturday every November, and he, goes to the DC bookstores, Kramer Books, and afterwards, and makes a big point of supporting small business. But to really make a big push at the Amazon warehouse was we felt, a betrayal of a lot of his policies.
Before you get, if you have questions and you want to start lining up at the microphone back there, make your way there. But Don, in the beginning, you said you wanted to address the question of why sales are down, and I want to add another question to that. As an independent bookstore owner, they all have these great personalities, and I know we've heard Ward say he went in looking for a book by Emile Zola, and there you have it. How do you determine, when you're looking at this community, what you're going to, you can't stock everything, so how do you make those decisions on what you're going to put in the store?
I have a book buyer who's been there for over 24 years. And it is difficult because a lot of our customers are there just for a week. So when we say we can order, I know you all know that nothing happens overnight on the vineyard. That's not our fault, but we order, maybe we get 2 to 3 days, but it's a constant struggle. And then we downsized last year, and but I have to give my staff high marks. If we're asked for a book, we note it, and if we're asked more than once, we bring that book in. But largely it comes down to a book buyer who loves what he does. He's really, I think you all would agree, an amazing person. You've probably never laid eyes on him. But I will never forget the customer who said to me, Dawn, I'm looking for a book, and I want Ward to tell his story that he wrote so beautifully in this, my bookstore book. But he said to me, I have a book, the cover was orange, I think it came out in the 70s, I think it was written by a sports figure, and I said, well, I don't know, but I know who will. And with that amount of information to work with, he came up with the book, and nothing makes me happier. I mean, books are my passion. They're my staff's passion. They're not making any money, I can tell you that. They're not taking home big paychecks. They sell books because we love books. Books are all we do. We can't take books as a loss leader because books are all we do. And to be able to have a customer say to me, I can't believe I found that book here, means the book buyer's doing his job. And he's doing his job because he's been doing it for a long time, and he loves books, and he knows books. And you don't find that at big box store books.
All right, Ward, before we go to a question from the audience, she wanted you to tell the story. And of course, the book, My Bookstore, 84 authors talked about their favorite independent bookstores. You want to push that microphone over for Ward?
There's a book that I'd heard about. It's written by a professor of English in either Kansas or Oklahoma. The book was published either in the 30s or the 40s. It had to do with an academic living in either Kansas or Oklahoma. And it was a New York Review of Books book, paperback, the novel had been long out of print. I don't think it was Dialis. I think it was Karen. He said, that would be Stoner. And I said, indeed it would. Of course, now I've forgotten the author.
John Williams. John Williams. Yeah.
These are wonderful occurrences when they happen. The other thought about the independent bookstore, of the full service variety, where you get old and you get a lot of translations, and you get classics and you get the new stuff. And you go beaver beavering away down in the Z's to try to find this damn Zola book whose title you can't remember either, by the way. And then you sort of, you kind of meander up the row, and you get to Yehoshua, and you get to all those wolves that are there, Thomas and Virginia and the rest of them. And if you keep sort of moving left, you walk out of there with 6 books, just because it was stuff that you never thought that you might like to read, but all the names are. I mean, if you're a constant reader, these names are all familiar, and you look at one of them or two of them, and you say, I know, I've heard this author, I've seen this author's book around for years, and I haven't bought one. So you go ahead and buy one. I don't know how you have a similar experience on Amazon. That bewilders me. I do have another thing, though. Somebody told us the other day of this. If my facts are, again, elastic. There's a bookstore in Brookline, Newton, one of those, better off burbs outside of Boston, where they charge $150 if you want to come in and buy a book.
No, it's a subscription. It's a subscription. It's not to buy.
Oh, a subscription.
Yeah.
Well, what does the subscription give you?
It gives you probably more access, but it's not just for one book.
Oh, no, I understand that. But if you want to go on and become and continue to be a constant a patron of the bookstore, in effect, $150 lets you walk in the door, right?
Maybe the audience knows better than we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not one of our members. That's the Costco does that. People don't mind. They pay $100 to go into Costco to shop. I think it's a dumb idea. I mean, it's hard enough to get people to go in a bookstore anyway without charging tickets.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's like a charity, like the
Yeah.
Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go down to, we got quite a line forming down here. First one up at the microphone, why don't you step up and say hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Sarah Loose-Look. I am an island native, but I have run an independent bookstore in Atlanta, Georgia for 20 years now. I grew up going to the Vineyard Haven Public Library every week. I grew up going to the Bunch of Grapes and Unicorn Tales, which has morphed into Edgartown Books now. But as an independent bookseller, my store is a specialty store, and so people always think that we're going to be okay because we're a specialty store. And I have always thought that Edgartown Books and Bunch of Grapes would be okay because you're on an island. So I'm wondering specifically to Dawn what you think the biggest threats are. If you think it's ebooks, if you think it's Amazon, because you don't have a Barnes & Noble or a Costco or a Walmart to compete with, but you do have the internet and you have the decline of books in general,
Yeah,
book,
good
the
question.
printed book. And also, I just also wanted to point out that the other thing that happened while Obama was at the Amazon warehouse is that Amazon started putting books at 60% off online, which we can't buy books as a bookstore for
Right.
that price. So that's our competition. Thank you.
Yeah, we've always, I'm continually amazed that we're an island 20 miles wide by 9 miles deep, and it can support 2 bookstores. Somebody said to me, oh, you must be disappointed when Edgartown Books was bought. Are you kidding me? The day an independent bookstore goes out of business is a sad day for all of us. So when somebody bought it and opened it again with Susan Mercier at the head, who was the longtime manager under the old owners, it was thrilling to me because, again, it's amazing that this island can support 2 independent bookstores. I've always known we're lucky in that our competition are not big box stores. But more and more, I understand, well, there's 2 things that worry me. One is Amazon, because you can get it overnight and you don't have to pay sales tax. The customer doesn't seem to know they're responsible for paying sales tax when Amazon doesn't. And you can do that in your pajamas, sitting at home, after you've come in and looked at our inventory. But the other thing that's frightening to me is, are we raising a generation that is not reading. I grew up going to the library. I will tell you, I was raised with no television. I thank my parents every day for that. So I won every reading roundup at the library, as did my brothers. You know, we didn't grow up buying books. And we have great public libraries on the island. I can't say enough about the programs they put on and what they do. But my fear is that we have young adults who want to watch Jersey Shore instead of reading Catcher in the Rye, perhaps, or, you know, that maybe we're raising a generation that isn't reading like we did.
Right.
Those are, you know, that.
Steve, you want to add anything to that, or as far as challenges? One of the things that as you're talking, Dawn, I'm thinking in Falmouth we have 8 Cousins Bookstore and Carol Chittenden, who's fabulous.
yeah.
And I can't imagine, you know, I have nieces and nephews, and I have a niece in particular who's a voracious reader, but, you know, she's 10, and when she's 8, I'm in there saying, okay, what at her, she reads at a much higher level, but what's appropriate for, you know, her interest? And Carol is always so great about whatever kid, whatever, you know, topic you're looking for. She goes right over and says, here's a book, here's a book. And the kids love these books. And as you say, we're you know, creating the future readers, but there aren't a lot of Carol Chittendens and 8 Cousins out there. Is there, Steve?
Well, there aren't a lot of Carol Chittendens, but there are. I'm encouraged by the number of young people who are working in stores. It's a little difficult because they're not getting rich, and it costs more and more to live these days. But the American Booksellers Association does a Winter Institute, it's called, and it's capped at 500 booksellers. And it moves around the country every January. And it's really a 4-day educational seminar for all the booksellers. And the first year I went was 5 years ago, and I looked around, and there are an awful lot of gray hairs and people who look like they'd been at it for a long time. And in the past 2 years I've gone, and I've been really encouraged by the colored hair, the tattoos, the piercings, you know, there's this new energy. You know, you see it, it's great. And I'm worried about the future of independent bookstores, but on the other hand, I think the stores that have survived the past onslaught of 25 years, whether it's a bunch of grapes or 8 Cousins or the other 2,000 stores around the country, they've gotten really good at what they do. And you know this if you shop off-island. There are author events, there's cafes. They have more to offer than they ever have in the way of stationery and greeting cards. They've done whatever it takes to stay in business so they can sell books. And I think we got waylaid with the e-book thing, you know, I think that's kind of interesting, but it seems to have flattened out, and it's digital, and that is what it is. I don't know what your sales look like, Richard, in e-book, but I just think that people, I have a number here, 60% of book sales occur online.
Wow.
So that's a lot, but 40% still occur in a brick and mortar store. But buyers discover books online only 17% of the time. So the downside of discovering in a bookstore is the showrooming idea. And I think the message that the independent bookseller has is, you know, we need to be more than a showroom if you want to keep walking in here and discover books. You know, Ward leaving with 6 books that he didn't know that he wanted, or anybody who has kids knows, Mom, can I have this book? That's just a visceral and a very different experience, and I would hate to see that disappear, because I think that's how people learn more than your own little group of internet, you know, algorithms.
Right. Let's have the next question up to the microphone.
This
You
is
wanna-
only, hi, I'm Amelia Smith. I live in West Tisbury. I bought my first Kindle about 1.5 years ago. And one of the things that I was excited about with the Kindle was that I could get all these books that were only available as ebooks, in addition to the, you know, free Jane Austens and all that. So I think what I'm wondering about is how independent bookstores, if there's, I know, Dawn, you said there wasn't enough volume to use one of those espresso book machines, but these smaller, tiny press and independent author-published ebooks that are out there that there's a demand for. Is there a way independent bookstores can kind of tap into that for the people who want it in a print version and alternative distribution things for that kind of book?
I think the espresso is sold at $100,000.
Yeah.
Is that right? I have to print a lot of books,
Oh, yeah.
to say nothing of the size of it.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. If there, in
Well,
other, yeah.
I could just quickly say that there are something like 600 independent bookstores around the country who actually can sell you ebooks. They have an agreement with Kobo, and if you're willing to put up with things that are a little more complicated than the Kindle, you can open up an account, on an iPad or a Sony e-reader or a Kobo, and you can buy that ebook from independent bookseller as if it was, an Amazon or BNN.com. I mean,
Thank you.
But
it's just downloading a
Yeah.
digital file, from a different
I guess
place.
my question was more about print versions of things that are currently only available as ebooks, or currently mostly available as ebooks and print-on-demand books. Because and it's not
I mean,
all of them.
I think that's-
Yeah, but,
It's really difficult right
Yeah.
now because Amor Towles' new novella is just coming out in ebook. That's really discouraging to me because independent bookstores made, what's the name of his book, please? Rules of Civility, yes, thank you. And this is a novella based on a character from Rules of Civility. And so to have it only released in ebook, I can sell you ebooks. Ebooks are never going to make me money at cents on the
Right.
I mean, ebooks will never pay to have a brick and mortar store. They never will.
Right.
They never will. Trust me on that.
We've only
So
got a
I
couple
can
minutes
sell
left,
you.
so let's get to the next question if we could. Thank you.
Before I fall over here. Hi, my name's Mike Pine, and I've worked in the book business. I ran the old corner bookstore in Boston and was a sales rep for a publishing company. And the decline of independent bookstores started long before Amazon. When Barnes & Noble came around and Lenny, whatever his last name is, and the questionable money behind that operation started, the competition for the independent bookstore really was severe. Was severe, and sales dropped dramatically. And before that, the Walden bookstores came along, the chain bookstores. When Amazon came along, I said to whoever would listen, I said, well, someday what's going to happen is I'm going to take my grandson to New York, and I'm going to say, see that? That's a bookstore. We used to have those in just about every city in America. But,
You have to go to Brooklyn, by the way.
Yeah, they're all in Brooklyn now.
It's Brooklyn. But, I mean, there were interesting things that happened in other countries. I know the president of Gallimard Publishing, and they don't allow the discounting of books in France.
Yeah. Steve,
So that's why there's so many bookstores.
yeah, Steve, I know you probably want to comment on this. What do you
So
think about
it's been a
threat
long
of
decline. It's not just
right,
Amazon.
before
Yes.
Amazon?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Or
But 2 years ago, we did not lose 500 independents. We lost 500 borders. And in today's world, it may be that Dawn is struggling, and it may be that there's, a challenge. But I live in Cambridge, and I'm telling you, the Harvard Bookstore, Porter Square Books, have had 3 of the best years they've ever had. And it's Len Riggio at Barnes & Noble who's trying to figure out how to completely rethink a big box bookstore that doesn't work anymore. I mean, it's a long history, but
And the Harvard Bookstore essentially has a sign up, if you see it here, buy it here.
buy it here,
Yeah,
that's right.
do we have
yeah.
time for one more question?
I put that
Yeah,
sign
okay,
up,
come on.
and I
Yep,
got
yep.
such negative publicity when I put that sign up.
Yeah, okay, let's get one last question if we
So,
can.
I think Mr. Russo is familiar with my favorite bookstore. The ones I'm familiar with is Faulkner House Books in New Orleans. And a wonderful manager there, Joanne Seeley, who is one of these people who you walk in and she, whoever it is, immediately goes up and says, well, look, you might be interested in this. And what it brings me to is, it seems like, if you were sort of boil this all down, you can compete on price or you can compete on quality. I don't think the bookstores are going to succeed in trying to figure out a way to compete on price. I don't see anything wrong. I mean, the price of textbooks is so high, can you blame students for looking for the best deal in a way? And that's part of the problem. But in terms of competing on quality, it's the experience of the individual who knows what you might be interested in, but it's also the experience of place, which is where the Faulkner House Books
Yeah.
experience comes in
Yeah.
for me. Just, you walk in, it's just a caress. I love that place. So can maybe any of you talk about how that aspect of the experience of being in a place with books, with individuals, and being interested in buying a book in a place like that?
This whole book, My Bookstore, is full of stories of exactly that. So we encourage you to buy that because it's full of anecdotes about exactly that. But I would like to say something about price. The big story last week, as one of you pointed out, was that Amazon is now discounting certain books 60%. They're not discounting all books 60%. There are just certain books in the front list. There was another story that didn't get nearly as much press last week, which is that Amazon is raising prices on certain books. They're raising prices on books that come from university presses, small presses, etc. Those prices are going up. I often hear people say who are Amazon, or people who defend Amazon, well, it's good for consumers because they're lowering the price of books. More people can afford to buy books. The problem with that logic is that they are only, if they were interested in lowering the price of books, this is fairly simple and straightforward. If they wanted to lower the price of books, if they were looking after America and wanting us all to be able to afford to buy books, then what would they do? They would lower the price of all books. But they don't do that. They lower the price of books in the front list. This season's books, Dan Brown's book, right? The books that are in independent bookstores, the ones that you can walk into a physical bookstore and buy the book, they discount those prices radically. They take a loss on those books. Why? Because they have the rest of it cornered. And if you're interested in price, then tell me the last time in American history, not only in the history of bookselling, but anywhere in the United States, in U.S. history, tell me an example of a business where prices went down once a monopoly was established.
Good point.
Right? They're discounting books now. But once the physical bookstores are gone, and Amazon owns the deal, right? Just ask yourself how much your books are going to be then.
Yeah, I wish we had more time, don't you? Don Braasch, who owns a bunch of grapes, Ward Just, Stephen Fischer, and Rick Russo.